You're listening to The Luxury Item, the podcast on the business of luxury and the people and companies that are shaping the future of the luxury industry. Here's your host, Scott Kerr.
While Americans stay sheltered in place to avoid potential coronavirus infection, many are turning to wine as their beverage of choice. Market research firm Nielsen reported that wine has been one of the strongest alcoholic categories this year, which is up 32% in the week ending on April 4 when you compare it to sales data from the same time last year. In fact, the demand for wine is so high, Americans spent about $423 million on the alcoholic beverage in the month of March alone, according to Nielsen. And in many cities, like here in New York City, restaurants with liquor licenses were given the green light to sell takeout liquor and wine. This resulted in a surge of creative desperation, with some of those restaurants pivoting to become more traditional wine retail shops to make ends meet. Importers, distributors, and wholesalers have seen their businesses shift rapidly from a mix of off- and on-premise customers to a much higher percentage of off-premise accounts, upending the whole wine distribution system. And like everything else COVID-19 touches, the wine business will permanently change. I can't think of a better wine expert to put this all in perspective than my guest on the Luxury Item podcast, Thomas Matthews. Thomas is the executive editor of the Wine Spectator. He's been writing for the Wine Spectator since 1987 when he was a freelancer living in Bordeaux. Hired full-time in 1988, he was based in London for a year before joining the New York office. He became Wine Spectator's executive editor in 1999. He's also the lead taster for Wines of Spain. Matthews has lived in Spain, France, and England and has degrees from Bennington College and Yale University. His passion for wine was sparked when he worked the 1979 harvest in Bordeaux and matured while working as a wine buyer for New York restaurants Odeon and Café Luxembourg in the 1980s. In 1993, he published A Year in the Vineyards, an account of his experiences in France. Welcome, Tom. Thanks for joining me on the Luxury Item podcast.
Great to be with you, Scott. Thank you.
I have to ask, I hope you're being safe and staying well these days. Where are you located?
I live with my wife in a brownstone in Brooklyn, and we have a peaceful garden, so we are comfortably sheltering in place.
Oh, that's great. So when the days are nicer like it is supposed to be, now today's kind of a rainy day here in New York City. Tomorrow you'll be able to enjoy the nice weather in your backyard. That's great. So before we
just
jump,
missed the grilling and the friends. We just missed the grilling and the friends.
Yeah. So before we jump into how the pandemic has upended the wine business, I'd love for you to tell the listeners who might not be familiar with Wine Spectator a little bit about the magazine. It's been around, I know, for about 40 years. It has, before Marvin Schenken purchased it, I think it was a newsletter, but I'd love to share about the magazine.
Well, thanks for asking, Scott. Wine Spectator was born in 1976, the bicentennial year, the year of the Judgment of Paris, the year when wine really started to seep into American consciousness. And it struggled along for 3 years under its original owner, but was failing, and Bob Morrissey, the founder, begged Marvin Schenken to buy the publication to keep it going. And Marvin did, and rode the white wine wave and the Napa wave and the Bordeaux Futures wave, and created what is now the most widely read wine magazine in the world. We have 400,000 paid subscribers to the print publication, and independent estimates say 3 million readers around the world. So we have a big voice, and we operate it for the consumer. We are really a lifestyle magazine for people that love wine and dining and travel and all the good things that come along with the wine lifestyle. And our core operation is rating wines. We review about 15,000 wines in independent blind tastings every year, trying to give unvarnished opinions about their quality and their character, so that people can really make the most of their budgets and explore their own palates and become wine lovers on their own.
So do you have the independent wine tasters around the world, or do they actually work for Wine Spectator, or they're separate?
We're relatively unique in that all of our tasters and editors are full-time on staff with us. And all of our tastings take place in our offices under circumstances that we control. And we cellar and prepare the wines in flights for the tasters. Our methodology is quite precise. It's well explained on our website, winespectator.com. But the two goals really, Scott, are A, to give every wine a fair and equal chance to show its best without bias or influence from producer or price. And secondly, to give the reader good, solid information to make prudent decisions.
You have a pretty fascinating background yourself, and I'd love to share with, if you could share with everybody how you found your way into working for Wine Spectator and a little bit about your background.
Well, thank you. But to put it in a broader perspective, one of the reasons I've stayed in the wine industry for 35 years is because of the people that are involved. Most people that get involved with wine do it because they're passionate about it, not because it's some pre-recorded career path. So there are many people in the wine industry who started someplace else and wound up here sharing bottles together. I dropped out of graduate school to write a novel and decided to do that in Spain. And this was back in 1978 when I was 25 years old. And I did finish the novel, never published it, but ran out of money at the same time. And a friend said, let's go to Bordeaux and pick grapes. I said, well, why would we do that? He said, well, the food is great. They give you all the wine you want to drink, and the work is easy. So I said,
Can't beat
let's
that.
go.
Right.
Well, he was right on 2 out of 3. The work was not easy, but I just fell in love with the whole world, Scott. I mean, we were in a little vineyard in Entre-de-Mer, family owned, nothing special, sold most of the wine in bulk, working with a team of Spaniards, and just the whole world of it, the agriculture and the architecture and the history and the science and the people, especially the people. So I said, well, I have got to, I'm not a very good novelist. Maybe I can write about wine. So I moved back to New York, and as you mentioned, I got a job at the Odeon restaurant. This was in 1982. It had just been open a couple of years in a part of town called Tribeca that nobody even knew what it was.
Right.
But it kind of caught fire. For the 4 years I was there, working my way up from bartender to wine buyer, it became very trendy, and we had a blast. I remember one night, Diana Ross and Leonard Bernstein both came in, both wearing floor-length white fur coats.
Wow.
Beautiful.
And if for people who aren't familiar with the Odeon, if anybody has read the book, Jay McInerney's Bright Lights, Big City, that pretty much captured what was going on at the Odeon at the time. And it really was this haven for people like Andy Warhol, Robert De Niro, John Belushi. It really was a cocaine-fueled scene back in the 80s, as pictured in Jay McInerney's book. But it was a really fascinating time, and like you said, Tribeca was a completely different part of New York City. So I'm sure you could write your own book just on that experience there.
Well, Jay, of course, is a successful novelist who became a wine writer. I've got to know him a little bit and joked to him that probably I served him a martini back in the 80s. But in any case, what, from a wine point of view, was interesting about that period was the explosion of Beaujolais Nouveau. Mm-hmm. That was huge. I could not keep it in stock when the third weekend of November rolled around.
Why was that?
Also,
why do wines like that become hot all of a sudden?
You know, Scott, if I knew that answer, I'd be rich. But also Chardonnay. That was the very earliest days of California Chardonnay exploding. I remember Sonoma-Cutrer. Suddenly I couldn't keep that on the wine list.
Right.
And Absolute. That was when Absolute Vodka, the premiumization of spirits, started happening. So the early 80s was a very interesting time for the wine and spirits industry, and I was very pleased that I had a chance to see it on the ground, in a consumer-facing, trendy restaurant. But after a while, I got tired of schlepping cases from the cellar to the bar. So I moved back to France, 1986 now, with my now wife, Sarah, and we moved back to Entre-de-Mer, a little wine village, to research a book about the life there, which I had never stopped thinking about since 1979. And during that period, I started writing freelancing for Wine Spectator. And in 1988, they said, we're expanding. We would like to have a reporter in Europe. Why don't you join the staff? So I said, sure, why not? I'll do it for a year or so. And then when the book is published, I'll move on to the next book. This book actually did get published. Thank you for mentioning it, Village in the Vineyards. But it had the shelf life of yogurt, like most books.
What was it about?
And did not make me. It was about the people and what it's like to live in a village that's devoted to wine. The local cooperative, the friendly mayor, his enemy, the secretary of the town hall, the crazy priest, all the kind of characters that you could imagine living in one of these backwater French villages.
So when you go back,
I was
going to say, when you go back to France, do you visit that village?
Very much.
And do they remember you? Are the same people there?
Oh yeah. And in fact, some of the younger people that we knew there have become close friends, and their daughters have come to stay with us in New York. So it's kind of been full circle.
Wow.
But again, that's the wine business. It's just hospitality, sharing, like-minded people, generous and friendly.
Yeah. So let's fast forward to today where, I don't have to tell you and the audience, we're living in unprecedented times. So what happened the day that you heard that restaurants and bars and winery tasting rooms were being shut down? And how did Wine Spectator cover that story? What happened that day and the following weeks?
As you probably recall, it sort of was rolling thunder. In early February, I was in Spain for a wine fair called Barcelona Wine Week. And this was the very first days of February, and all of the Asian visitors who were scheduled to come had canceled. Yeah. So we were talking with the organizers, well, what's going on? Well, we don't really know, but there seems to be an illness over there. We're still kind of learning about it, but it's quite a blow to the fair not to have these Asian buyers and visitors. So I got back, and there was Vinexpo New York at the very first days of March at the Javits Center, and the Javits Center was empty. And what's going on? Well, things have been canceled. People aren't coming. So our first report on the coronavirus on winespectator.com was posted on February 27th. And at that point, it was still focused mostly on what was happening in Hong Kong and mainland China, but also noted that Italy had just begun reporting cases, and that the lockdown had started and tourism was threatened. So by the time our office was closed on March 16th, of course, everything was basically locked down. And but we've moved to remote working. We have 40 people on our staff. Everybody's scattered to the four winds. And I think that our website has continued to do amazing job covering. We are publishing stories every 2 or 3 days, both hard-hitting facts about the damage that the wine experience, and especially the restaurant experience, is having, but also more light-hearted things like what to read, what to watch, how to entertain at home by yourself, things that can maybe help people get through the hard times.
So are you finding that you're hearing from some of these wineries and owners and some of the people that you've worked with and wrote about over the years coming to you either for advice or thoughts or want to get their story out? What are you hearing from them?
Well, it depends on the sector. Yeah. The winery sector is kind of sort of schizophrenic. On one hand, they're continuing to tend the vines and work in the winery in order to manage their inventory and prepare for this year's harvest. But on the other side, they don't have any visitors,
right?
And they don't have, and half their customers are closed. So, for example, a young man named Jesse Katz at Aperture in Healdsburg, Sonoma, had spent 5 years building his winery and tasting room to open to visitors. Grand opening was April 17th. So, I mean, that didn't happen. So he had a virtual opening through Zoom, and it's just, but at least they still have their normal tending the vines, pruning, spraying, whatever, that work, which helps keep them sane.
Right.
The restaurant industry, of course, is a disaster. I mean, we have 4,000 restaurants in our Wine List Awards program, and we did a survey of them recently, and only about 5%, mostly international wineries, are actually fully open for business. 50% are open for takeout or delivery, but of that, their business is down 70, 80%.
Yeah, I was talking about earlier in at the beginning of the show, on the opening of the show, how a lot of these restaurants, especially in the big cities, with liquor licenses, they've been sort of given the green light to sell takeout liquor and wine, and they've all of a sudden had to pivot their business to become these wine retail shops to make ends meet.
And that has been a benefit for them, Scott. In our survey, more than half of the restaurants that are open are also selling wine. Yeah. So it's something that they've already paid for, that now they can actually get some cash flow from, and they're offering, in many cases, excellent prices. So for savvy consumers, I would say check out your local restaurant and see what they've got to offer.
Yeah. And, wine sales are exploding right now, particularly online because of, this coronavirus quarantine. So do you see that continuing?
Well, the retailers, they just can't believe it. I mean, for them, it's like every day is Christmas.
Right.
But on the other hand, they're social distancing, and as you said, the people not coming to the store, having to figure out how to do it all digitally and through delivery has posed a lot of challenges. And they are telling me that the kinds of wines that people are buying have shifted. That in the first few days, there was some celebration kind of buying, high end, might as well splurge, who knows how long it'll last kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But now it's really gone back to magnums, bag and boxes, $10 bottles, value for money.
Interesting.
So they may be selling, they may be selling more volume, but they're making less money.
What I was looking at this, and I'll talk about that shortly, but one of the trends that came out from the study from IWSR said that a lot of people are reverting to these familiar, trusted brands they know, that comfort feeling, if you will. So I'm wondering if that plays into effect here, because, trusted brands are beacons in tough times like this.
Yes. For example, we just had an interview with the Terlato Wine Group based in Chicago on Shanken News Daily, our sister site. And CEO Bill Terlato was talking about how they've shifted many of their top brands that used to go to restaurants into retailers. So suddenly things like Chapoutier or Gaia are actually available in retail shops where they weren't before, but it's the big volume brands like the Federalists, which are that's in the $15 or $20 or $30 price range that are really, really going sales.
Yeah. So what do you think the long-term effects are going to be of the coronavirus on the wine market?
Well, you mentioned the online sales. Wine.com, one of the biggest digital retailers, reported that their sales doubled this March from March 2019. And Gary Fish, a retailer in New Jersey and Napa, says that he went from several hundred users of this mobile app to several thousand in just a couple of weeks.
Wow.
I think that the online arm is definitely going to continue. And, will that affect the kinds of wines that people buy? I think it will. I think the kind of wine that you get after you've walked into a shop and talked to a knowledgeable salesperson or an owner about your taste and what they see happening is likely to be a little more esoteric, maybe a little more out of your comfort zone than if you're browsing an online catalog.
Right.
Where I think something that's familiar is going to be your go-to. So I think we could see a certain homogenization of the wine market going forward. I think also that bigger wineries are in a better position to survive financially than the small wineries that depended so much on visitors and restaurants. So if the small wineries fail, that also will reduce diversity and increase kind of homogenization.
Yeah, and it will affect some of these niche and lesser known wines as well, where again, if people just want to keep going back to the brands they're familiar with, what's going to happen to those brands?
And let's not forget the tariffs, Scott. I mean, that
right.
has
The
already
tariffs, of course,
damaged many imported wines and the importers of those wines, and those small importers who were seeking out the little treasures in Spain or Germany, or that's going to reduce diversity too.
Right. I was reading recently that this whole, everybody being self-isolated these days, people are becoming more interested in online wine and liquor auctions. And I was reading that Christie's just pulled in $1 million from a wine and spirits online auction, and some other auction pulled like $7 million from that. So seems the fine wine market seems pretty resilient. Do you agree with that?
There are collectors who are on the hunt for certain kinds of bottles, especially rare Burgundies, old Bordeaux, and I think they're looking at buying opportunities. But that's such a tiny niche in the market. I mean, when you look at everybody that's unemployed and all the restaurants closed, which is where so much wine was drunk, I think overall the effect is really depressing.
Yeah. I was talking about IWSR, and they just came out with this study, or where actually it was trends, if they will, on things that are transforming consumer drinking behavior thanks to COVID-19. I'd love to hear your perspective on a couple of them. And we talked about e-commerce as really being the business critical now. And they found that alcoholic beverage sales in North America grew like 3.5 times the rate in early 2020. Wine and spirits are growing 2 times as fast as beer. Do you think after the coronavirus, I don't know when it will fade, but when people start going out again and things start picking up and opening up, do you think that trend will carry over as the crisis fades?
Well, I think we have to look at 2 phases at least. Besides the current one, which is everybody alone. As we slowly begin to come out of it and the regulations slowly ease, I think that wine sales might actually decline. People will have stocked up enough for their personal consumption, but yet they still won't be having dinner parties or going out, so they won't have ramped up new purchases. I think there could be a kind of stagnant period that might last 4 months, 6 months.
Yeah.
Until people start feeling comfortable again eating out with strangers. But I think that once we have the vaccine, once life is more back to normal, I feel like wine has become such an integral part of American lifestyle that it will resume its normal pace and once again become a beverage of celebration and delight.
Yeah, and one of the other trends they actually said was, basically at-home consumption is the new going out. That it's encouraging people to consume more at home at this point. But when they'll start going out is another point. But and especially also thinking about the economic downturn that's happening now will impact disposable incomes.
We all lived through 2008, and that was also a difficult time for the wine industry. For many of the same reasons, people just didn't have the money to spend on non-essentials. But I think it came back in fine shape after that.
Right.
And to me, this feels like we'll get back to. I mean, what do you think? You have an interesting perspective on the luxury market overall.
Yeah.
I mean, some wine has got one foot in daily consumption and one foot in luxury, as you mentioned. Do you think the luxury market is sustainable in this new world we're about to move into?
I think the luxury market will evolve, and like every crisis that we've been through, any kind of underlying shifts or cultural shifts that were just waiting under the ground to happen, usually events like this push that up to the forefront and accelerate it. Where luxury, especially within the digital world, where luxury was always sort of behind everybody else in terms of selling luxury online and the digitalization of luxury sales, it's going to change the whole entire retail business. It was going that way anyway, but this sort of gave it that shove that people are just going to also think about what luxury means to them and what's important and what's not important. I was just reading, I'm sure you've seen it too, that Neiman Marcus just filed for bankruptcy, or they will file for bankruptcy, and that's just scratching the surface. You will see in the next few months more bankruptcies by large retailers, and just people are going to be forced to shop completely differently. We're seeing direct-to-consumer businesses, some of them that were sort of still figuring out where they were going or becoming profitable, all of a sudden are finding their way now that people are doing more things online. So they've sort of had a shove and a resurgence. So luxury is here to stay, but again, it's just evolving and will be something else. I think time will tell. I think it's still too early. There's research coming out every week, it's taking a pulse on the consumer. But again, that's very reactive. I think we still have to wait and see how it all turns out. There's a lot of things that are going to come into play here, but it'll be interesting times.
I think there is a sort of innate human appreciation for things that are finely crafted, made of beautiful materials, work extremely well, can be handed down to your children. So, from that perspective, I think the luxury market and the high-end wine market has its place, right? Mouton Rothschild or Antinori in Italy, or some of these cult Harlem Cabernets in Napa. The brands that have transcended just a beverage and have become something more meaningful.
Yeah, and one of the last trends that they talk about is about moderation being on the back burner. That before the lockdown, many people were drinking healthier and in moderation. Now they're prioritizing comfort. So do you think that's also a temporary hiatus? Like, this is kind of a temporary hiatus, and people are going to start drinking healthier again?
Frankly, I hope so. I mean, I think that people are anxious, and alcohol is a way of addressing anxiety. But in the long term, it's better as part of a multi-tiered approach, including exercise, healthy diet, sleep. I mean, personally, I have cut back my wine consumption. It just feels like a prudent thing to do. I mean, for me, wine is shared around the table with friends and family. When my wife and I are sitting down together for dinner, it just doesn't feel right to open a bottle every night. So, and I think that, yes, let the belt out, relax a little bit, people will probably gain weight as well.
Aren't we all?
But
carb loading is.
Let's be healthy. I think wine is part of a healthy lifestyle, but it has to be integrated.
Yeah,
that would be my plea for people.
Celebrities have really gotten into the wine game and have really put keeping wine in the spotlight. Basketball star Carmelo Anthony has a weekly YouTube series, What's in Your Glass, where he talks about wine with other celebrities. Netflix released that movie. I think has it really said? Oh, Uncorked, about what it's like to be a master sommelier. I was also reading that there's a collaboration with Snoop Dogg and 19 Crimes wine label, which they sort of put themselves on the map with their AR label a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing a collaboration, and this past week, Ashton Kutcher launched this quarantine wine with profits going to COVID-19. All this buzz is great for the industry.
It's true. I mean, and it's part of what I'm saying, that it's part of our culture. Wine is wine appreciation, enjoyment, exploration has become part of what we do. And whether it's LeBron James or Ashton Kutcher or Sting, and I think people take their cues from these celebrities, and that's another reason it's not going away. Wine appreciation and enjoyment.
Yeah, and all the celebrities we just talked about have a stronger appeal to a younger audience, millennials. So I think, like you said, they're the influencers. So they will keep the industry alive as long as these influencers continue to embrace wine in their life.
I think, though, from a wine journalist perspective, let's taste these wines and make sure that they're actually good. Not just have some
throw a name
celebrity
on it.
signature on the label.
Right.
Yeah, because there has been some of that, unfortunately, and I think that's very short term. Somebody like Sting, who's actually owns this huge estate in Tuscany and is working biodynamically to make very solid wines, or even the Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie Miraval that's done in partnership with the Perrin family of Chateau de Beaucastel in Provence. I mean, some of these wines are delicious, fantastic. John Bon Jovi's rosé is excellent, made with Gerard Bertrand. I haven't tasted the quarantine wine from Ashton and Mila yet, but maybe it's not going to be quite as ground up kind of quality.
Yeah, we'll see. So, what do you think? Put on your look in your crystal ball, and what do you think is on the radar next for the wine industry? How do you think it's going to change overall? Let's fast forward, 1 to 2 years from now.
Well, I have been a skeptic to some extent of the natural wine movement. I think that it is overly ideological and unyielding, and I think it is tolerant of flaws in the name of ideological purity in a way that I think doesn't make sense for something that we eat and drink. But I want to tip my hat to the tendency to take better care of the earth and to integrate how we grow the grapes and make the wine with an understanding of ecosystems, environmental sustainability, climate change. I think, they are the leading edge of a very important movement. And however it evolves, I think it's going in the right direction. I think that's going to be a major trend.
So do you think the coronavirus will have any effect on this? Will it accelerate it?
I would think so. I mean, I think we're not going to stop washing our hands,
right,
like madmen. We're going to be very concerned about what we're eating, how we're living. We know a healthier lifestyle, I think, is going to be at the top of most people's priority lists.
Right. It seems like a lot of wineries. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, I mean, the Silver Oak has just built a winery in Alexander Valley that is the most environmentally positive. I forget the name of the certification. We've just reported it, but it's a step ahead of the LEED certifications. Wineries are stewards of the earth, and I think we're just going to see a more intense approach to that.
You would think they're going to have to change their business model. Now, we're already seeing a lot of these wineries, and I think we touched about it a little bit about it at the beginning, How, what are some of the things they have to, innovate now to explore, these new business models given the times?
True. As you pointed out already, the internet side is crucial. Fortunately, the United States laws have changed so that now wineries can basically ship anywhere in the country. So at least they don't have the artificial regulatory burdens holding them back. But I mean, really, if the restaurants don't reopen, then all bets are off.
Right.
I mean, that is where wine culture is forged, and wine is drunk, and people are exposed to wine, and without that, our whole culture changes in ways that I can't even imagine, and the wine business along with it.
Yeah.
Are you going to go to restaurants when they open, or what? Will people go to restaurants?
I think I will go to restaurants, and I think people are naturally social animals. I think people are going to be, when testing is done, I think, when it's sort of safe to go out, I think restaurants obviously have to reimagine social distancing. They have to reimagine their whole entire business model from, I'll call it, how can you create contactless service in a restaurant? And I think you'll see that more, and you'll see restaurants actually advertising and marketing things like that. They would also have to look at their business model more home delivery, and what does that look like? I'm not going to say there's going to be virtual restaurants, but I think the business is going to change, and I think people, at least for the near future, there'll be more people staying at home and dining, and if that's the case, how do restaurants still be part of their life? And maybe they won't be able to go out, or maybe they can maybe go out once every few months, but knowing that restaurant has certain restrictions, and set it up so you still have a pleasant experience, and you're not anxious when you go there, that you'll know that you had the same experience at that restaurant before this went down.
Yeah, well, you may be right, Scott, but that, for a New Yorker, that just sounds like not a happy future.
I know. I'm just, I guess, some wishful thinking. So the last question I ask all my guests, it's called the luxury item question. I might twist it a little bit, given the times. And I normally ask, if you were stranded on a deserted island and you had one luxury item with you, what would that luxury item be? And it can't be a form of transportation or requiring mobile service. And maybe I should change the question to, if you were stranded, sheltered in place in your home for a while, and you could have only one luxury item with you, what would that be?
What has been essential to my life that would become a luxury item if I were stranded on a desert island or sheltered in place? For example, I've been carrying a pen and paper with me since college. Everywhere I go, I have a notebook and a pen. Now, I've never had a fancy fountain pen or leather-bound notebooks, but I would put writing tools at the very top of my list. But I think I've also spent probably some of my happiest hours of my life just sitting in an easy chair reading. And if I were stranded on a desert island, if I had a really nice leather club chair and a perfectly engineered reading lamp, that could turn a nightmare into a dream come true, as long as the books didn't run out. So that's what I'm going to go with.
And would it be Bright Lights, Big City by any chance?
Why not?
Bring back the old days.
Think about the life left behind.
Tom, thank you so much. This was really informative, and I appreciate you doing this virtual podcast, the first one. Hopefully, when things get back to normal, get back into the studio again. But you've been a terrific guest, and I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much for the time and the interest, and let's hope we can share a wine, not virtually, one of these days.
I hope so, and stay well. That's it for this episode of the Luxury Item Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this useful and entertaining, I would be really grateful if you can share it with a friend or colleague. I would love it if you subscribe so you never miss an episode. And while you're there, be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It really helps other listeners find us. The Luxury Item Podcast is a production of Silvertone Consulting. I'm your host, Scott Kerr. Until next time.